two things that I fundamentally get pissed off about when I express how I feel about how you get better in the National Hockey League and how the Flyers need to get better. And it's not hard, okay? One, you cannot do an NBA process. You can't do a Sixers process. I've been clear about this for years. And yet, there are people who go, oh, Russ just wants Danny Briere to be Sam Hinkie. It doesn't work. You can't do it. But what you can do is you can make the team worse by removing good players and preventing the team from getting a ton of wins. I get yelled at on Snow the Goalie. Bundy yelled at me last week. Russ, you can't tell players to go out and suck. Nobody's telling the players to go out and suck. Nobody's going out and telling John Tortorella to lose. But guess what? If your team doesn't have the talent to go out and win on a nightly basis, you're not going to win. And if you don't win, you're probably going to get a better pick. And now the Flyers are doing something that everybody should be able to get behind. They're clearing cap, and they're putting themselves in position for a better pick. Okay? So let's kind of go back, recalibrate, look at the entirety of Briere's time as the GM. He has now successfully offloaded Provorov, Hayes. In theory, had offloaded Sanheim. Torrey Krug said nay with the waiving of the no movement clause, but effectively had also tried to get rid of Sanheim. Sanheim is a good player, so maybe it ends up working out. He's now cleared Frost and Farabee. They're all, in their own ways, they're all good, or at the very least, NHL quality players. But you've now cleared that cap. And when the offseason rolls around, the Flyers are a much more dangerous team. Because whether they want to go after an unrestricted free agent, whether they decide to break the old boys club and actually offer sheet players, they can offer sheet players now because they'll have the cap flexibility to do so. And by the way, they're going to have an exponentially higher pick than they would have if they had kept Frost and Farabee. Now, one injury that happened last night, Rasmus Ristolainen goes out in the second period. People start going, oh boy, is Risto traded too? We got another first-round pick. No, he was apparently hurt. Now, I will point out that last year, Risto had a lot of interest. And around the time that Risto was garnering the most interest, he got hurt. And so I said earlier this season, man, if he comes back and he plays well, you have to at least consider making a deal, because the last thing you can afford is to mentally decide, yeah, we're actually okay with trading Risto, then he gets hurt. Now, I don't know what the injury is. I don't know how long the injury is going to be. It might have just been a one-night thing. Maybe it'll be 2 months. Who knows? One thing that you do know is that Risto has played the best hockey of his career this year. And the Flyers are probably still torn internally on whether or not to trade him. If they can get a first for him, they should absolutely explore it. Now, I would make the argument that at this point, the Flyers have enough picks in this draft. I'd look at trying to get a pick for 2026. Because right now you have 3 firsts and 4 seconds now because of this trade of Frost and Farabee. I'd be looking to try to punt some of that draft capital to 2026. That's just me. So Risto might be on the block. Scott Laughton, nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. Will Scott Laughton remain a Flyer? Entirely possible. And I saw, where's it at? There was somebody over here. Landros said, hopefully Danny Briere has some more to lower both ceiling and the floor. Don't stop there. I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. They have a few other guys on this team who are going to be attractive. Paling, in theory, could be attractive to a playoff team. Hathaway could be attractive to a playoff team. Like, they have additional pieces. If they really want to bottom out here, they could. Now, whether or not they do bottom out is a totally different thing. I will give, and this is going to shock some people, I'm going to give Torts a lot of credit here. Because I mentioned earlier, Torts is the only one who seemingly consistently says rebuild. Like, Torts is in a really weird position right now. Because if they were to offload a Risto, a Laughton, Paling, Hathaway, whatever combo of those guys, it sends a very clear message. I mean, I think right now, if you're in that locker room, if you were somehow delusional enough to be like, oh yeah, maybe they will add at the deadline, you know it's probably over now. The hope of making the playoffs this year, if you're a player, has probably been extinguished. Now, again, I get it. Players are delusional. They probably think they're going to win the cup. But like as things stand right now, the Flyers are in a much better position if you look at the draft lottery. And again, like if they remove a few more of these pieces, Torts is going to have a hell of a job on his hands because you're going to have to somehow instill this winning culture that you have made the ultimate priority as an organization. Torts' culture's Torts. They're simpatico. So if that is the case, Torts is going to have to figure out a way to keep the team together, galvanize the team, not have them tune him out, not have Mishkov turn on him, and oh, by the way, like try to remain positive in the midst of losing because they've now lost 3 straight games by a combined score of 10-0. And they've removed 2 of their best scoring options. I mean, Frost had probably some of the best vision on the team. Farabee, despite inconsistencies, still probably one of their best overall goal scoring options. So with those guys gone, I don't know. Now, everybody knows where I feel about Torts, right? Like, Torts, not the right guy. But if culture really is your thing, if culture is your number one thing, and you have been very much on Culture Island this entire time with your flag very firmly planted in the soil, then this is the best time for Torts to be the coach of the team. Because, like, let's just say you fire Torts, which they're not going to. Say they moved on from Torts. Whoever goes in there for the rest of the season is set up to fail. Like, if you look at this and you say, we're going to encourage Torts to step aside or to take an advisory role. We're going to put Brad Shaw in as head coach. Brad Shaw is being set up to fail with like 30-ish games left. One, I don't think Torts would do that. Like, I don't think that there's a scenario where the Flyers fire him. I don't think that there's a scenario where Torts walks away from the bench and sets up his lead assistant to fail. But like, you'd be putting so much of an onus on a guy to keep that locker room together in the midst of these trades that are going to, potentially cause some issues. Now, I think it was Sanheim. Sanheim went on the record as saying that, a bunch of the guys got together and had some drinks and had some dinner before Frost and Farabee left. And, Torts said that it was a really close locker room, but they're pros. Listen, on a human level, you feel bad for some of these Flyers players, right? They've grown up playing with Frost and Farabee. They've been mainstays with this organization to some extent. But like, for better or worse, the facts don't care about your feelings. And the facts are this team isn't good enough. Team's not really good enough to make the playoffs. Team's certainly not good enough to contend for a Stanley Cup. And ultimately, as an organization, your goal is to win a cup. So your feelings might be hurt, but the long-term viability of this team as a cup contender has gotten significantly better by making this one trade. Now, I will advocate they should continue making more. Whether they do or not remains to be seen. If the only thing that they can get right now, like let's say Risto's healthy, or he bounces back soon. If all you can get for Risto is like the 26th pick in this draft, I don't know if I do that. I might actually wait until the offseason and try to get a 2026 pick. Because again, I'm starting to wonder whether or not you're going to be able to do exactly what you want in this draft by getting even more capital. Like the Edmonton and the Colorado picks, are they going to be able to help you move up higher into like a second pick? Like if the Flyers were to draft, let's say 5th overall or 6th overall, are those 2 later picks in the first round going to move you from 6 to 4 or 6 to 3? I don't think so. Will they somehow be able to like package those 2 in another player or a couple of second round picks to go from like, let's say, I don't know, say the better of the 2 picks ends up being like 24. Can those 2 picks combined get you up to number 20 or to number 18? Maybe, and that's maybe where the whole thing is actually more valuable to have those picks. But I don't think you need another first this year if it's at the very end of round 1. Now you're starting to get a lot of the prognosticators and the scouts saying, well, it's really not a very deep draft after all. Of course, the year that the Flyers have all this draft capital, now the prognosticators say it's not a deep draft. The prognosticators and the scouts are sometimes wrong. So you don't just give up on this draft. But I do think at some point you have to diversify the portfolio a little bit, and maybe you do look a little bit beyond 2025 when you're making deals. To me, it's impossible to walk away from this trade and to walk away from this weekend feeling anything but good about the future of the team. It's amazing how one move can change your mentality. I saw somebody say on Twitter, it was last night, or it was really early this morning. Somebody was like, told me that I was like flip-flopping because last week I said that the Flyers were kind of stuck in mediocrity and how they were, running it back again and yada, 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 and then they made a trade. Well, yeah, things change, right? Like, in fairness, the circumstances of things change. Where the Flyers were a week ago, I didn't have a ton of confidence because it didn't feel like they were going anywhere. In fairness, the Flyers prior to this trade felt very much kind of in that gray area. They've now dealt two of their best playmaking / goal-scoring options, and it's very clear that, the pick is probably the way to go this year. Now, again, for the 15th time, they can't tell players to go out and lose, but they can field a bad roster, and that bad roster isn't going to win a lot of games. Make of that what you will. Some people have a really hard time understanding that. You can't tank. Tanking, players they don't want to lose on purpose. They don't do that. Nobody tells them that they should. It's just fucking stupid. We just have there are a lot of thick-headed people in this market. Sports doesn't have to be that. The concept of analyzing a sport really doesn't have to be that hard. And if you just go back over the last 20, 25 teams that have won a Stanley Cup, they've probably had a number 1 or number 2 overall pick on their team. Some have maybe had more than one. Colorado, which is an example that some people like to try to use, Colorado picked 5 times in 7 years in the top 10, 3 times in the top 5. And guess what Colorado ended up doing? They didn't hit on all of those top 10 picks. They hit on enough of them. They didn't hit on every single top 5 pick, but they hit on enough of them. And they ultimately won a cup. Now, I'm not saying that the Flyers need to tear it all the way down. They never will. Not saying the Flyers need to go on a 3-year tank, because they're not going to. They're in year 2 of their own rebuild. You get a good pick this year. You figure out a way to get creative with those other 2 first round picks you have, and those 4 second-round picks. And guess what? All of a sudden, this team has a very bright future. And yes, that one trade of Frost and Farabee is enough to mentally change my outlook on the rest of the season, and is enough for me to continue to give grace into the offseason, because it's a very clear indication that you have the much bigger picture in mind.